The desert had a way of keeping secrets. It swallowed sounds, buried bones, and turned truth into dust that blew away with the next wind. Rhett Calder had grown up knowing this, same as he'd grown up knowing the weight of a Colt revolver and the particular silence that fell over a room when his father walked in. Jacob Calder had been a hard man, fair but unyielding, the kind who believed a handshake meant something and a man's word was worth more than gold. That's why seeing him laid out on a plank table in the undertaker's back room felt like staring at the end of the world. 3 shots, the undertaker said, a thin man named Polk who smelled like formaldehyde and tobacco. Clean grouping, professional work. Rhett didn't answer. He stood with his hat in his hands, staring at his father's gray face. Jacob looked smaller in death, diminished somehow, as if whoever pulled the trigger had taken more than just his life. They took his money belt, Polk continued, his voice clinical, detached. Watch too. Left the rifle, though. Strange, that. Not strange, Rhett said quietly. Someone wanted it to look like robbery but didn't want to carry a weapon that could be traced. Polk's eyebrows lifted slightly. You've given this some thought. I've given it all the thought it deserves. Rhett set his hat back on his head, tugged the brim low. Who found him? Miguel Cordero. Came across him on the North Road, just past the old Miller place. Said he'd been dead maybe 6-8 hours by then. 6 to 8 hours. That meant sometime before dawn. Jacob Calder had left the house the previous evening, told Rhett's sister Clara he had business in town. Never came home. Sheriff been out to look? Polk made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sigh. Sheriff Drummond made his official report. Robbery gone wrong. Drifters, probably. Could be in Mexico by now. That what he really thinks? That's what he wrote down. Rhett studied the undertaker's face, saw the careful neutrality there, the way a man looked when he knew more than he was saying and planned to keep it that way. I'll want to see where they found him. Your sister's outside, Polk said, ignoring the statement. Been waiting 2 hours. Maybe you should... I'll see her after. Polk nodded slowly. Suit yourself. But Rhett, whatever you're thinking of doing, think twice. Some stones are better left unturned. I'll keep that in mind. Clara was pacing the wooden sidewalk outside, her black dress already dusty from the street, her face pale and drawn. She was 22, 3 years younger than Rhett, with their mother's dark eyes and their father's stubborn jaw. When she saw him, her expression cycled through relief, grief, and fury in rapid succession. 5 days, she said, her voice shaking. You've been gone 5 days, and you come back to this. Clara, don't. She held up a hand. Don't you dare apologize. Don't you dare tell me it's not your fault. I needed you here, Rhett. I needed you here, and instead I got Deputy Willis knocking on my door at dawn telling me our father was dead. Rhett stood there and took it because she was right, and they both knew it. He'd been up in the high country, checking fence lines on the northern range, fixing what winter had broken. Good, honest work that took him far from town and the complications that came with it. Far from the arguments with Jacob about his future, about settling down, about taking responsibility for something beyond the next horizon. Now that horizon had collapsed into a single point, the plank table behind him, and the man lying cold on it. I'm sorry, he said, and meant it. Some of the fire went out of Clara's eyes. She sagged against the post behind her, suddenly looking much older than 22. They said it was robbery, she whispered. But Daddy's rifle was worth more than his money belt, and his watch was Grandpa's, solid silver. Why leave those? Because it wasn't robbery. Clara looked up sharply. Then what was it? Murder. The word hung between them, heavy as a coffin. Who? Clara's voice was barely audible. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out. Rhett, no, you can't. The sheriff said, the sheriff's lying. Clara flinched as if he'd slapped her. That's a serious accusation. It's a serious crime. Rhett glanced down the street toward the sheriff's office at the far end. Drummond knows something, or he's covering for someone. Either way, I aim to find out which. And then what? You going to start a war over this? If that's what it takes. That's not what Daddy would have wanted. Rhett looked at his sister, saw the plea in her eyes, the desperate hope that he'd be reasonable, that he'd grieve and move on like civilized people did. "Daddy's not here to want anything anymore," he said gently, "but I am, and I won't let this stand." Before Clara could argue further, a voice called out from across the street. "Rhett Calder! Thought that was you." Rhett turned to find a man approaching, tall and lean, with dark hair slicked back and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore expensive clothes, tailored vest, silver watch chain, polished boots, and moved with the easy confidence of someone who'd never been told no. Marco Vale, professional gambler, occasional gun runner, and the closest thing Rhett had to a friend in this town, which wasn't saying much. "Marco. Heard about your father. Terrible business." Marco's tone suggested he found it more interesting than terrible. "I was sorry to hear it." "I'm sure you were." Marco's smile widened slightly. Now, no need for hostility. I like Jacob. He was an honest man, which made him a rarity in these parts." "Honest men seem to end up dead in these parts. Tragic pattern, that." Marco glanced at Clara, tipped his hat. "Miss Calder, you have my condolences." Clara nodded stiffly, but said nothing. Marco turned his attention back to Rhett. "I was hoping we might have a word. Privately. Not a good time. I think you'll want to hear what I have to say. It concerns your father's situation." Rhett studied him for a long moment. Marco Vale was many things, charming, duplicitous, dangerous when cornered, but he wasn't stupid. If he was offering information, there was a reason. "Clara, go home. Lock the doors. Don't open them for anyone you don't know." "Rhett, please." She held his gaze for 3 long seconds, then turned and walked away, her spine rigid with frustration. When she was out of earshot, Rhett turned back to Marco. "Talk. Not here. Too many ears." Marco jerked his head toward the saloon across the street. "Buy you a drink?" "It's 10 in the morning." "Good point. I'll buy you breakfast instead." The saloon was called the Golden Eagle, though the only eagle in evidence was a moth-eaten bird badly mounted over the bar. At this hour, it was nearly empty. A few dedicated drinkers nursing hangovers, a piano player sleeping face down on his keys, the usual dregs. Marco led Rhett to a table in the back corner, where the light was poor and the view was good. A tired-looking woman brought them coffee and eggs without being asked. Marco waited until she was gone before speaking. "Your father came to see me 3 days before he died." Rhett's hand paused halfway to his coffee cup. "Why?" "He wanted information about Salazar Vance." The name dropped into the conversation like a stone down a well. Rhett heard it hit bottom, heard the echoes of everything it meant. Salazar Vance, crime boss, land baron, the man who owned half the territory and controlled the other half through fear and favors. Nobody crossed Vance and lived to tell about it. Nobody even talked about crossing him without checking the shadows first. Why would my father ask about Vance? That's what I wanted to know. Marco leaned back, fingers drumming the table. Jacob was cagey about it. Said he'd heard things. Rumors about money moving through town, large amounts, no clear source. Wanted to know if I'd heard the same. Had you? I'd heard whispers, nothing concrete, but enough to know that someone was running a big operation and didn't want attention. Vance. Marco shrugged. Vance is the obvious answer. He's got his fingers in everything. Cattle rustling, claim jumping, protection rackets. But this felt different. Bigger. How big? The kind of big that makes people disappear. Marco met Rhett's eyes. I told Jacob to let it alone. Told him some questions got you killed. He didn't listen. Rhett's jaw tightened. You think Vance killed him? I think your father stuck his nose somewhere it didn't belong, and now he's being measured for a coffin. Marco paused. But here's the interesting part. The day after Jacob came to see me, someone else started asking questions. Who? Man named Garrett. Works for Vance. Big fellow, scar across his throat, mean as a rattlesnake with a headache. He wanted to know if anyone had been asking about Vance's business. Specifically, if anyone had been asking about a certain shipment. What kind of shipment? He didn't specify, and I didn't ask. I value my continued breathing. Rhett processed this, fitting pieces together in his mind. You think my father found out about this shipment. I think your father found out about something, and it got him killed. Whether it was the shipment or something else, I couldn't say. Marco leaned forward. But I can tell you this, whatever he stumbled onto, it was worth killing for. And Vance doesn't kill for pocket change. The coffee sat untouched between them, going cold. Why are you telling me this? Rhett asked. Marco smiled that empty smile again. Call it a guilty conscience. I like Jacob. Should have warned him harder. Or I'm making an investment. You're going after Vance, aren't you? Yes? Alone? If I have to. Then you'll die just like your father. Marco pulled out a cigar, rolled it between his fingers without lighting it. But if you had help, someone who knows Vance's operation, who can get you access to information you'd never find on your own, you might have a chance. And what would this help cost me? 10%. Of what? Whatever you find. Jacob thought there was money involved. Big money. If you recover it, I want my cut. Rhett laughed, a sound without humor. You want to profit off my father's murder. I want to profit off bringing his killer to justice. See? It's all about perspective. Marco finally lit the cigar, blew smoke toward the ceiling. Look, I'm not going to pretend this is about friendship or honor. I'm a businessman, but our interests align here. You want revenge. I want money. Vance is sitting on both. We help each other. We both get what we want. And if there's no money? Then I wasted my time and you got revenge with professional help. Not a bad consolation prize. Rhett studied the gambler's face, searching for the lie, the angle, the trap. He found all three, but also saw something else, genuine calculation. Marco Vale was greedy, but he was smart about it. And right now, smart help sounded better than no help at all. 5%, Rhett said. 8. 6, and you provide weapons. Marco considered this, then grinned. Deal. I like you, Calder. You've got your father's spine, but your mother's brains. Don't talk about my mother. Fair enough. Marco stood, offered his hand. Partners? Rhett looked at the hand for a long moment, thinking about trust and betrayal and the particular kind of devil's bargain he was making. Then he shook it. Partners. For now. For now is all we've got. Marco grabbed his hat. Meet me tonight. 9 o'clock, the old tannery on the east side. Come alone, come armed, and for God's sake, don't tell anyone where you're going. Why the tannery? Because I've got someone you need to meet. Someone who worked for Vance and lived to quit. She might know what your father found. She? Life's full of surprises, Calder. Get used to it. Rhett spent the afternoon at the sheriff's office, though spent was probably the wrong word. Wasted fit better. Sheriff Drummond was a thick man in his 50s with a politician's smile and a coward's eyes. He sat behind his desk like a king on a throne, radiating authority he'd bought rather than earned. Terrible tragedy, Rhett. Terrible. Your father was a pillar of this community. Then why aren't you looking for his killer? Drummond's smile never wavered. We are looking. Got deputies checking every trail out of town, talking to witnesses. There were no witnesses. Well, that's the problem, isn't it? Without witnesses, without evidence, we're shooting in the dark. The sheriff leaned back, made a show of sympathy. I understand your frustration. I do. But sometimes these things just happen. Wrong place, wrong time. Drifters looking for easy money. My father's rifle was worth $100. They left it. Drifters aren't known for smart thinking. Neither are corrupt sheriffs, but they usually manage to collect their bribes on time. The temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees. Drummond's smile finally died. You want to repeat that? You heard me? I'm trying to make allowances here, son. You're grieving, you're angry, but you're about 1 second from crossing a line you can't uncross. Rhett planted his hands on the desk and leaned in. My father was murdered because he knew something worth killing for, and you're pretending it was random chance. That makes you either incompetent or complicit. Which is it? Drummond stood slowly, his face darkening. Get out of my office. Tell me about Salazar Vance. Get out. Tell me about the shipment. Drummond's hand dropped to his gun. Boy, I'm giving you one last chance to walk out that door. Otherwise, I'll lock you up for disturbing the peace, and you can cool off in a cell for a few days." They stared at each other across the desk, two men with their hands near their weapons, the air thick with violence waiting to happen. Finally, Rhett straightened. "You're right. I'm upset. I'll go." Drummond relaxed slightly. "Smart choice. But Sheriff, when I prove you're dirty, and I will prove it, I'm coming back, and we're going to have a different kind of conversation." "Looking forward to it," Drummond said flatly. Rhett walked out before either of them could do something irreversible. Outside, the deputy, a younger man named Willis with an honest face, caught up to him. "Rhett, wait." Rhett stopped, turned. "Deputy?" Willis glanced back at the office, lowered his voice. "I wanted to say, I'm sorry about your father. He was a good man. Thank you. And I wanted to tell you," Willis hesitated, clearly wrestling with something. "I was out at the Miller place yesterday where they found him. And there were tracks. 2 horses, looked like they'd been waiting there a while. Ground was all churned up like maybe there was a struggle. Why isn't that in the report?" Willis's face went tight. "Sheriff said it was probably from earlier, unrelated." "But you don't think so?" "I think," Willis glanced around again, "I think some questions are dangerous to ask, and I think your father asked them anyway." "Do you know what he was looking into?" "No, but I know he came to the office about a week ago, wanted to file a complaint. Drummond met with him privately, sent me out. When your father left, he looked angry, disappointed. Drummond wouldn't help him. I don't know what was said, but after that your father stopped coming to the office." Willis met Rhett's eyes. "I can't help you officially. Drummond would have my badge. But unofficially, if you need information, if you need someone to look the other way while you do what needs doing, I'm not blind, and I'm not bought." It was a dangerous admission, the kind that could get a man fired or worse. "I'll remember that," Rhett said quietly. "Thank you." Willis nodded and headed back inside before anyone noticed they were talking. Rhett stood on the sidewalk, watching the sun slide toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. His father had died on this same street, under this same sky, killed by men who thought they were untouchable. Time to prove them wrong. Machit. The old tannery sat on the edge of town like a rotting tooth, abandoned for years after the owner drank himself to death and his creditors couldn't find a buyer. It was the kind of place people avoided, dark, decaying, haunted by the smell of old leather and older secrets. Rhett arrived 15 minutes early, tied his horse in the scrub 100 yards out, and approached on foot. The colt on his hip felt heavier than usual, or maybe that was just the weight of what he was walking into. Marco was already there, leaning against a support post and smoking another cigar. He looked relaxed, but Rhett noticed his right hand was free and positioned near his own weapon. "Punctual," Marco said. "I like that. Where's this contact of yours?" "Patience. She's careful, needs to be sure we're alone." They waited in silence, listening to the night sounds, insects, distant coyotes, the wind moving through gaps in the walls. After 5 minutes, a figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the tannery. She was younger than Rhett expected, maybe 30, with copper-colored hair tied back and eyes that had seen too much. She moved like a cat, every step deliberate, her hand resting on the knife at her belt. "This him?" she asked Marco. Rhett called her. "Meet Delilah Cross." "Delilah?" "Rhett." Delilah looked Rhett up and down, assessing. "You look like your father." "You knew him?" "Saw him around. Seemed like a decent man. Sorry for your loss." "Marco says you used to work for Vance." "Used to. Don't anymore. Don't plan to again." She pulled out a flask, took a drink, didn't offer to share. "I heard what happened to your father. Heard it was Garrett who pulled the trigger." Rhett's hand tightened on his gun. "You're sure?" "Sure as I can be without watching it happen. Garrett was bragging about it at the saloon 2 days ago. Said he took care of a problem. Said Vance paid him a bonus." "Why?" "Your father found out about the gold." The word hit Rhett like a fist. "What gold?" Delilah looked at Marco, who nodded. She sighed and settled against the wall. "About 2 months ago, Vance got word of a Wells Fargo shipment. Big one. Payroll for the mining camps up north, plus a private delivery for some cattle buyer. 50,000 in gold and cash, maybe more. He planned a robbery, hired professionals, mapped the route, everything clean. And it went sideways. The guards put up more fight than expected. 3 of Vance's men died. But they got the gold. Delilah's expression went dark. Problem was, the driver survived, managed to crawl to a ranch house before he bled out. Told the rancher what happened, gave descriptions. Your father heard about it. Rhett's mind raced. My father knew about the robbery. He knew more than that. He figured out where Vance was hiding the gold, was going to go to the federal marshals, blow the whole thing open. Delilah met his eyes. Vance couldn't let that happen. So Garrett made sure your father never talked to anyone. The night seemed to close in, the air growing thicker. Where's the gold now? Rhett asked. That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Delilah smiled grimly. Vance moved it after your father started sniffing around. Only a few people know where. Garrett's one of them. Vance himself, obviously, and maybe 1 or 2 others. Who? If I knew that, I'd have sold the information already and be living in San Francisco. She pushed off the wall. But I can tell you this, Vance is paranoid. He doesn't trust his own shadow. My guess? The gold's somewhere close, somewhere he can keep an eye on it, but I couldn't tell you where. Marco spoke up. Could you find out? Not without getting my throat cut. I'm out of that life, Marco. I was clear about that. Even for 10%? Delilah laughed. My life's worth more than 10% of 50,000. Sorry. What about 20? She paused, considered. Keep talking. You help us find the gold, you get 20%. That's $10,000, Delilah. Enough to disappear, start over anywhere you want. Or enough to get killed trying. You know Vance's operation better than anyone. You know his habits, his patterns, his weaknesses. Marco's voice was smooth as silk. We're going after him anyway, with or without you. But with you, we actually have a chance, and you have a chance at real freedom. Delilah looked between them, calculating odds, weighing risks. Finally, she looked at Rhett. You understand this is suicide, right? Going after Vance? Men have tried. They all died. I'm not interested in trying, Rhett said quietly. I'm interested in succeeding. Something shifted in Delilah's expression, recognition, maybe, or respect. You really are like your father, same stubborn streak. Is that a yes? She was quiet for a long moment, then, 20%. Plus, I want your word that when this is over, you walk away. No revenge quest beyond Garrett and Vance. Their men scattered after, you let them scatter. Why do you care? Because some of those men are just trying to survive, same as me. They're not all monsters. I want your word you won't hunt them. Rhett thought about Clara, about the future she deserved, about becoming the kind of man who hunted people for sport. You have my word. Then I'm in. Delilah extended her hand. But we do this smart. No cowboy heroics, no shooting first and asking questions later. We plan, we prepare, and we don't move until we're ready. Rhett shook her hand. Agreed. Marco grinned. Well, isn't this cozy? A gunslinger, a gambler, and a reformed criminal. Sounds like the start of a bad joke. Or a tragic ending, Delilah muttered. Look, first things first, we need information. Vance keeps records, ledgers, maps, correspondence. He's careful, but he's also greedy. He writes everything down, probably has copies hidden somewhere safe. Where? His house, maybe. Or his office above the saloon. Could be a third location entirely. She shrugged. That's what we need to find out. How? Rhett asked. We start asking questions. Carefully. We watch his operations, track his movements, figure out his routine. And we look for weak spots, people who might be willing to talk, places where security's lax. That could take weeks. Or it could take days if we're smart and lucky. Delilah fixed him with a hard stare. But either way, we don't rush this. Your father rushed, and he's dead. We're not following him into the ground. The words stung, but Rhett knew she was right. Fine. We take our time, but we start now. Now you're talking sense. Delilah started toward the door, then paused. One more thing. Vance has ears everywhere. Sheriff's office, saloons, hotels, everywhere. Watch what you say and who you say it around. Trust nobody. Present company included? Marco asked with a smile. Especially present company. She vanished into the darkness, leaving Rhett and Marco alone in the rotting tannery. Well, Marco said cheerfully, that went better than expected. She only threatened to kill us twice. I was betting on 4. You trust her? About as far as I can throw her, but she's smart, she's motivated, and she hates Vance. That's good enough for now. Marco clapped Rhett Pruitt on the shoulder. Come on, let's get out of here before the rats decide we're dinner. They walked out into the night, 3 unlikely allies bound by greed, grief, and the promise of violence to come. Somewhere in the darkness, Salazar Vance slept peacefully in his mansion, surrounded by guards and gold, utterly unaware that his empire had just been marked for destruction. But morning was coming, and with it, a reckoning written in blood and fire. Rhett rode home slowly, his mind turning over everything he'd learned. The gold, Garrett, Vance's paranoia, his father's investigation. It was like looking at a puzzle with half the pieces missing, trying to see the full picture through the gaps. Clara was still awake when he arrived, sitting in the kitchen with a single lamp burning. She looked up as he entered, her face drawn. Where have you been? Talking to people? Dangerous people? All people are dangerous in the right circumstances. Clara's mouth tightened. That's not an answer. Rhett pulled out a chair, sat heavily. I'm going after the men who killed Daddy. I'm going to find them, and I'm going to make them pay. That's all you need to know. And get yourself killed in the process. Maybe. But I won't die wondering. They sat in silence for a while, the lamplight casting long shadows across the worn table where they'd eaten 1,000 meals as a family, where their father had taught them mathematics and ethics and the value of a hard day's work. I talked to Reverend Morrison today, Clara said finally, about the service. When? Day after tomorrow. He said we should bury Daddy quickly. This heat. She didn't finish, didn't need to. Okay, Rhett said, day after tomorrow. Will you be there? The question hurt more than it should have. Of course I'll be there. Because last time I needed you, you weren't. Rhett flinched. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Rhett. None of it. But I can't lose you too. I can't. Her voice broke. You're all I have left. He reached across the table, took her hand. It was cold despite the warm night. You're not going to lose me. I promise. Don't make promises you can't keep. I don't. Clara studied his face, searching for reassurance, for certainty, for something to hold on to in the chaos their lives had become. Whatever she found, it wasn't enough, but it would have to do. I'm going to bed, she said, standing. Lock the doors, check the windows. I will. She paused at the doorway. Rhett, when you find them, what are you going to do? He met her eyes, let her see the truth there. What needs to be done? She nodded once, quickly, and disappeared down the hall. Rhett sat alone in the kitchen, listening to the house settle around him, thinking about justice and revenge and the thin line between them. His father had believed in law, in order, in doing things the right way, and it had gotten him killed. Maybe there was a lesson in that. Maybe the only way to beat men like Vance was to become something they understood, something harder, colder, more ruthless than they were. Or maybe that's exactly what they wanted. Maybe that's how they won, by turning good men into monsters. Rhett didn't have answers, but he had purpose, and right now, that was enough. He checked the locks, doused the lamp, and sat in darkness with his gun in his lap, waiting for morning and the war that would come with it. The funeral came and went like a fever dream, black clothes, hollow condolences, dirt hitting pine. Rhett stood at the graveside with Clara's hand clutched in his, watching strangers who'd never spoken to Jacob Calder pretend they'd lost a friend. Sheriff Drummond showed up wearing sympathy like a borrowed coat, stayed exactly long enough to be seen, then disappeared before the final prayer. Deputy Willis lingered longer, hat in hand, eyes avoiding Rhett's. When it was over and the last mourner had drifted away, Clara released Rhett's hand and walked to the grave alone. She stood there for a long time, her lips moving in silent conversation with the dead. Rhett gave her the space, turned his attention to the horizon where heat shimmered off the desert floor and made the world look like it was melting. Marco appeared at his elbow, dressed in black that probably cost more than most men made in a month. "Touching service," the gambler said quietly. "You come to pay respects or gather intelligence?" "Can it be both?" Marco's gaze swept the cemetery. "Notice who didn't show? Besides Vance?" Besides Vance, Garrett wasn't here. Neither was Dutch Keller or any of Vance's usual crew. They're making themselves scarce. Guilty conscience? Or orders to stay away? Vance might be a bastard, but he's not stupid. Having his men show up at the funeral of a man they murdered would raise questions. Rhett filed that away. Delilah make contact? This morning. She's been watching Vance's compound. Says he's been agitated, meeting with people at odd hours. Something spooked him. My father's investigation? Could be, or could be something else entirely. Marco paused. She wants to meet tonight. Says she has information. Where? The old mission, south of town. Midnight. That's getting to be a habit with you people. Why is everyone so afraid of daylight? Marco smiled thinly. Because daylight gets you killed. See you there, Calder. He melted away between the gravestones, leaving Rhett alone with his sister and his dead. Clara eventually returned, her face composed, but her eyes red-rimmed. You ready to go home? Rhett asked. I'm ready to stop pretending this is home. She looked at the house in the distance, the ranch their father had built with his own hands. This place is poisoned now. Every room, every corner. He's supposed to be there, and he's not. I can't live like that. Where would you go? Aunt Margaret's in Denver. She's been asking me to visit for years. Maybe I'll stay a while. Clara turned to him. You should come. Leave this town. Leave this mess. Start somewhere fresh. Can't do that. Can't or won't. Does it matter? Clara's expression hardened. It matters to me. I just buried our father, Rhett. I won't bury you too. Then don't stick around to watch. She recoiled as if he'd struck her. Is that what you want? For me to leave? I want you safe. And you won't be safe here. Not while I'm doing what needs doing. Rhett gentled his tone. Go to Denver. Stay with Aunt Margaret. When this is over, I'll come find you. And if you don't survive, then at least you will. They stared at each other across the gap that grief had opened between them. Two people who'd grown up in the same house but were now standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. I'll leave tomorrow, Clara said finally, her voice flat. I'll pack tonight. I'll arrange the stage. She nodded once, turned away, then stopped. Rhett, when you find the men who did this, don't become them. Don't let this turn you into something Daddy wouldn't recognize. Before he could answer, she walked away, her black dress trailing dust. Rhett stood alone in the cemetery, surrounded by the dead, and wondered if he was already someone his father wouldn't recognize. The sun beat down mercilessly. Somewhere in town, Salazar Vance was counting his gold and planning his next move. And Rhett Calder was one day closer to making him pay for it. The question was how much of himself he'd lose in the process. He didn't have an answer yet, but he was beginning to suspect he wouldn't like it when he found one. That night, after seeing Clara settled and the house locked tight, Rhett rode south toward the old mission. It had been abandoned for decades, left to crumble into the desert after the priests who'd built it died and no one came to replace them. Now it was just a skeleton of adobe and timber, haunted by scorpions and memories. He arrived early again, a habit born from watching his father prepare for difficult conversations. Jacob Calder had always said that if you weren't early, you were giving someone else control. And control, in dangerous situations, was the difference between walking away and being carried out. The mission's bell tower loomed against the stars, its bell long since stolen or melted down for bullets. Rhett tied his horse in the ruins of what had once been a stable, checked his weapons, and moved through the darkness on foot. He found Delilah waiting in what remained of the chapel, sitting on a broken pew with moonlight streaming through gaps in the roof. She had a rifle across her knees and eyes that tracked his approach like a predator measuring prey. You're learning, she said by way of greeting. Came in quiet, checked your surroundings. Your father teach you that? My father taught me a lot of things. Not sure how much of it applies to hunting murderers. More than you'd think. She stood, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. Marco's not with you. He'll be here, probably making sure we're not walking into a trap. Smart man. Untrustworthy, but smart. Delilah moved to the empty window frame, scanned the darkness beyond. I spent the last 2 days watching Vance. He's got a routine: breakfast at his house, afternoon at his office above the saloon, evenings gambling or meeting with associates, like clockwork. Everyone has patterns. His pattern is paranoia. He never goes anywhere without at least 2 guards. His house is a fortress, armed men at every entrance, dogs patrolling the grounds. The office is slightly better, but still locked up tighter than a bank vault. She turned back to Rhett. Your father would have had a hell of a time getting close to him. But he did get close. Close enough to learn about the gold. Which means someone talked. Someone on the inside. Delilah pulled a piece of paper from her pocket, unfolded it. I made a list. Everyone who worked the robbery, everyone who knew about it afterward, everyone who might have been in a position to leak information. Rhett took the paper, held it up to the moonlight. A dozen names, some familiar, most not. Which ones are still alive? As of yesterday, 7. The others died in the robbery or were killed afterward. Vance doesn't like loose ends. These 7, where are they? Scattered. 2 work at the saloon. 1's a ranch hand out at the Triple Diamond. 3 left town after your father died, which tells you something. The last one, she hesitated. The last one's in jail. For what? Drunk and disorderly. Deputy Willis arrested him 3 days ago. He's sitting in a cell right now, probably terrified Vance will have him killed before he talks. Rhett's mind raced. If he's scared, he might be willing to deal. If he's scared, he might also clam up and pray Vance shows mercy. Delilah shook her head. But it's worth a try. His name's Tommy Ricketts, small-time thief, big-time coward. He drove one of the wagons during the robbery. Can you get me in to see him? Me? No, but Marco might be able to arrange something. He's got connections in the sheriff's office. As if summoned by his name, Marco emerged from the shadows at the far end of the chapel, moving silently despite his expensive boots. Talking about me again? I'm flattered. He joined them by the window, glanced at the list in Rhett's hand. Ah, the usual suspects. I've had dealings with most of these gentlemen, and I use the term loosely. Can you get us access to Tommy Ricketts? Rhett asked. The drunken lockup? Probably. Deputy Willis owes me a favor, but it'll cost you. How much? Not money. Information. Marco's expression went serious. Willis wants to know what you're planning. He's nervous about getting caught between you and Vance, wants to make sure he's backing the right horse. Tell him I'm planning to bring Vance down. Legally, if possible. Otherwise, if necessary. He'll want more than that. Then tell him this. When I move against Vance, I'll make sure he's not caught in the crossfire. But if he tries to warn Vance or interfere, all bets are off. Marco nodded slowly. I can work with that. I'll talk to him tomorrow, arrange a visit for tomorrow night, late, after Drummond goes home. What about the other names on this list? Delilah asked. We can't just ignore them. We don't ignore them. We prioritize. Rhett folded the paper, tucked it into his pocket. Ricketts first because he's accessible and scared. Then the ranch hand. Isolated location, easier to apply pressure. The saloon workers we save for last because Vance will be watching them closest. And the 3 who ran? We note where they went and save them as backup. If the others don't pan out, we track them down. Delilah studied him with something approaching approval. You think tactically. That's good. Your father was the same way, always thinking 2 steps ahead. It didn't save him. No, she agreed quietly. But it got him further than most men would have made it. That counts for something. They stood in silence for a moment, 3 conspirators in a ruined church, plotting the downfall of the most dangerous man in the territory. Finally, Marco spoke. There's something else you should know. I heard through the usual channels that Vance is planning something big. A meeting, 4 days from now, with some investors from back east. Word is they're interested in expanding his operations, bringing in serious money. What kind of operations? The usual, cattle, land, maybe railroads if the rumors are true, but the interesting part is the location. He's hosting the meeting at his ranch, not in town. That means he'll have most of his men concentrated in one place, leaving other areas vulnerable. Rhett saw where this was going. The office above the saloon. Exactly. If we're going to search it, that would be the time. Minimal security, maximum access. 4 days, Rhett muttered. Not much time to prepare. Which is why we start now. Delilah pulled out a small notebook, flipped it open. I've been mapping Vance's properties, the office, the ranch, storage facilities. I can get you detailed layouts by tomorrow. How detailed? Windows, doors, sightlines, patrol routes, everything you'd need to plan an entry. And how exactly are you getting this information? Marco asked with a raised eyebrow. Delilah smiled coldly. I used to work for the man, remember? I know how he thinks, where he cuts corners, what he considers secure versus what actually is secure. Plus, I've been bribing a few people. Amazing what a bottle of whiskey will buy you in this town. Bribery, surveillance, breaking and entering, Marco said cheerfully. We're building quite the criminal resume here. We're building a case, Rhett corrected. Everything we find, we document. When this is over, there'll be enough evidence to hang Vance legally. Assuming we survive to present it. Assuming that, yes. Delilah closed her notebook. I'll get you those maps, but we need to talk about the endgame here. Say we find the gold. Say we get evidence of Vance's crimes. Say we even manage to identify your father's killer. Then what? We hand it all to Sheriff Drummond? The man's on Vance's payroll. We go over his head, federal marshals, territorial governor, someone with authority and integrity. And how long do you think we'll survive while waiting for the cavalry to arrive? Vance will know the second we move against him. He'll come at us with everything he has. Then we make sure we're ready when he does. The determination in Rhett's voice seemed to settle something in the ruined chapel. Delilah nodded slowly. Marco's smile turned sharp and predatory. Well then, the gambler said, I suppose we'd better get to work. They dispersed into the night separately, 3 shadows moving through darkness, each carrying pieces of a plan that would either destroy Salazar Vance or get them all killed trying. Rhett rode home slowly, his mind cataloging details, weighing risks, calculating odds. The house was dark when he arrived. Clara had gone to bed hours ago, probably lying awake and wrestling with her decision to leave. Part of him wanted to go to her, to apologize, to promise everything would be fine. But he'd never been good at lying, especially to family. Instead, he sat on the porch and cleaned his gun, the familiar ritual soothing in its precision. Disassemble, inspect, oil, reassemble. His father had taught him the process when he was 12, had made him practice until he could do it blindfolded. A gun's only as reliable as the man who maintains it, Jacob had said. You take care of your tools, they'll take care of you. Rhett wondered what his father would think of him now, using those same tools to hunt the men who'd killed him. Would Jacob approve? Or would he see it as a betrayal of everything he'd stood for? Law, order, civilized society. The desert wind picked up, carrying the smell of sage and dust and distant rain that might never arrive. Somewhere out there, Garrett was sleeping soundly, confident in Vance's protection. Somewhere out there, 50,000 in gold sat hidden, blood money that had cost good men their lives. And somewhere between here and justice, Rhett Calder would have to decide what kind of man he was willing to become. He finished cleaning the gun, loaded it, and set it on the table beside him. Then he sat in the darkness and watched the stars wheel overhead, counting the hours until tomorrow and the beginning of the real work. The next day moved like honey in winter, slow, thick, resistant. Rhett spent the morning helping Clara pack, saying nothing while she folded clothes and wrapped keepsakes and pretended she wasn't running away. The stage would leave at noon. She'd be in Denver by the end of the week, safe in Aunt Margaret's house, far from whatever storm was about to break over this town. You'll write? She asked as they loaded her trunk onto the stage. When I can. And you'll come visit when this is over? When it's over. She searched his face, looking for promises he couldn't make, reassurances he didn't have. Finally, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. Don't die, she whispered. I'll do my best. The stage pulled away in a cloud of dust and rattling wheels, carrying his sister toward safety and leaving Rhett standing in the street feeling more alone than he'd ever felt in his life. He watched until the stage disappeared over the horizon, then turned and walked straight to the nearest saloon. The Golden Eagle was busier during daylight than it had been during his last visit. Cowboys fresh off trail drives, miners spending their fines, gamblers looking for easy marks. Rhett pushed through to the bar, ordered whiskey, and settled in to watch. According to Delilah's list, 2 of Vance's men worked here, one as a bartender, the other as a bouncer. The bartender was a thick man with scarred knuckles and a face like weathered leather. The bouncer was younger, meaner, with eyes that tracked trouble like a wolf tracking wounded prey. Rhett nursed his whiskey and observed. The bartender moved efficiently, pouring drinks and collecting money with practiced ease. Nothing about his demeanor suggested he was sitting on information worth killing for. But the bouncer. The bouncer was nervous. His gaze kept drifting to the door. His hand kept checking the gun at his hip. And twice Rhett saw him wipe sweat from his brow despite the relatively cool interior. Scared men made mistakes, and mistakes created opportunities. Rhett waited until the bouncer stepped outside for a smoke, then followed at a discreet distance. The man had posted himself in the alley beside the saloon, leaning against the wall with a cigarette dangling from his lips. "Got a light?" Rhett asked, stepping into the alley. The bouncer's hand went to his gun before he recognized Rhett and forced himself to relax. "Don't smoke." Funny profession for someone carrying cigarettes. "They're for nerves." The bouncer took a long drag, exhaled slowly. "What do you want, Calder?" "To talk." "About what?" "About why you look like a man waiting for a bullet with his name on it." The bouncer's jaw tightened. "Don't know what you mean." "Sure you do. You've been jumpy all morning. Keep watching the door like you expect trouble. That's the behavior of someone who knows something dangerous." Rhett moved closer, keeping his voice low. "I'm guessing it has to do with my father." "I don't know anything about your father." "Then why are you sweating?" The bouncer flicked his cigarette away, straightened up. "This conversation's over." He tried to push past Rhett, but Rhett's hand shot out and grabbed his arm. Not hard, not threatening, just firm enough to make a point. "I'm going to find out what happened," Rhett said quietly. "One way or another, I'm going to know who killed him and why. When I do, I'll remember who helped and who didn't. So I'm asking you now, while it still matters, do you know anything?" The bouncer stared at him, conflict playing across his face. Fear warred with conscience. Self-preservation battled guilt. Finally, he jerked his arm free. "I don't know anything, and even if I did, I wouldn't tell you. Vance has ears everywhere, and men who talk end up like your father." He jabbed a finger at Rhett's chest. "You want to die? Keep asking questions, but leave me out of it." He disappeared back into the saloon, leaving Rhett alone in the alley with confirmation that fear was spreading through Vance's organization like poison. Fear meant cracks, and cracks meant vulnerability. Rhett allowed himself a small, cold smile and headed back into the sunlight. That evening, as promised, Marco came to collect him for the visit to Tommy Ricketts. They rode to the sheriff's office just after sunset, timing their arrival for the shift change when Drummond would be gone and Willis would be on duty. The deputy met them at the door, his honest face creased with worry. "This is a bad idea," he said by way of greeting. "Most good ideas start out that way," Marco replied cheerfully. "Tommy ready for visitors?" "He's in the back cell, drunk as usual, been crying all day about wanting a lawyer." Willis glanced at Rhett. "You planning to hurt him?" "I'm planning to talk to him." "That's not an answer." "It's the only one you're getting." Willis held Rhett's gaze for a long moment, then sighed and stepped aside. 10 minutes. That's all I can give you, and whatever you learn, you didn't hear it here." "Understood." Willis led them through the office to the cells and back. There were 3, all empty except for the middle one, where a thin, shaking man sat on a cot with his head in his hands. Tommy Ricketts looked like the definition of regret. He was maybe 40, with thinning hair and a face that had seen too much hard living. His hands trembled as he looked up at Rhett's approach, his eyes red-rimmed and watery. "Who are you?" he slurred. "Jacob Calder's son." The color drained from Tommy's face. Oh, hell no." "Relax, Tommy. I just want to talk." I didn't do nothing. I swear I didn't. You drove a wagon in the Wells Fargo robbery. You knew about the gold. Rhett gripped the cell bars. My father found out about it, and someone killed him. I need to know who. Tommy scrambled backward on the cot, pressing himself against the wall. I can't. You don't understand. I can't talk about that. You're already in jail. How much worse can it get? You don't know Vance. You don't know what he does to people who cross him. Tommy's voice cracked. He'll kill me. He'll kill my sister. He'll make it slow and make me watch. Vance can't touch you in here. The hell he can't. You think these bars mean anything? You think Drummond won't let Vance's men in here the second you leave? Tommy shook his head frantically. I'm already dead. I just don't know when yet. Rhett exchanged a glance with Marco, saw his own thoughts reflected there. Tommy wasn't just scared, he was terrified, which meant he knew something worth being terrified about. What if I could get you out of here? Rhett asked. Out of town, somewhere safe? There's nowhere safe, not from Vance. Denver. My sister just left for Denver. I could send you there, set you up with money and a fresh start. Rhett kept his voice steady, reasonable. But I need information first. Who killed my father? Tommy stared at him, war raging across his face. Then, slowly, he started to cry. It was Garrett, he whispered. Garrett did it. Vance's orders. Why? Because your father figured it out. He knew about the robbery, knew Vance was behind it. He was going to go to the marshals, blow the whole thing wide open. Tommy wiped his face with shaking hands. Vance couldn't let that happen, so he sent Garrett to handle it. Where's the gold now? I don't know. Vance moved it after your father started asking questions. Only a few people know where Garrett, maybe Dutch Keller, Vance himself. What about the ledgers, the records? Tommy's eyes widened. How do you know about those? Doesn't matter. Where are they? Vance's office above the saloon. He keeps everything there, contracts, payoffs, maps. It's all documented. He's paranoid about losing track of his assets. Tommy leaned forward suddenly. But you can't get in there. It's locked up tight, and he's got men watching it day and night. Let me worry about that. Rhett pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil, slid them through the bars. Draw me a map. Layout of the office, where the safe is, where the guards are posted. If I do this, you'll get me out of here? You swear? I swear. Tommy hesitated, then grabbed the paper with trembling hands and started to draw. Tommy's hand shook so badly the pencil kept slipping, leaving jagged lines across the paper. He drew quickly, muttering to himself, glancing up every few seconds like Vance himself might materialize in the cell. When he finished, he shoved the paper back through the bars as if it were burning his fingers. That's everything I know. The safe's behind the painting, southwest wall, combination lock, but I don't know the numbers. Guards rotate every 4 hours, 2 men at a time, one at the bottom of the stairs, one at the top. Tommy's voice dropped to a whisper. And there's a back entrance, through the storage room of the general store next door. Vance owns it, keeps it locked, but there's a connecting door most people don't know about. Rhett studied the crude map, committing details to memory. When's the meeting with the Eastern investors? Day after tomorrow, noon. Vance is pulling most of his men to the ranch for it. Wants to make an impression, show he's got muscle. Tommy gripped the bars. That's your window, but you've got maybe 2 hours before someone notices the office is compromised. 2 hours is plenty. Not if things go wrong, not if someone sounds the alarm. Tommy's eyes were desperate now. You promised you'd get me out. When? Tonight. Deputy Willis will transfer you to the federal marshal's custody in Ridgemont. From there, you'll take the train to Denver under a different name. Rhett glanced at Marco. You'll arrange it? Already working on it, Marco said. Though I have to say our expenses are mounting. This is getting expensive. Put it on my tab. Your tab's getting long enough to stretch to Mexico. Then I guess I better find that gold. Willis appeared at the end of the corridor, tapping his pocket watch. Time's up. Drummond's been known to come back early, and I'd rather not explain this. Rhett folded Tommy's map and tucked it inside his coat. You did the right thing. The right thing gets you killed in this town, Tommy muttered. But maybe dying clean's better than living dirty. Either way, get me on that train, please. You have my word. They left Tommy huddled on his cot, looking like a man who'd just signed his own death warrant and was waiting to see if the ink would dry before the hangman arrived. Outside, the night had turned cool, desert temperatures dropping fast once the sun disappeared. Marco lit a cigar, his face thoughtful in the flickering matchlight. He's not wrong, you know. About the timing, 2 hours isn't much margin for error. Then we don't make errors. Easier said than done. Vance's office isn't some backwater claim shack. It's fortified, watched, and one mistake means we're swimming in bullets. Marco blew smoke into the darkness. We need a solid plan, and we need Delilah's maps. She said she'd have them by tomorrow. Then tomorrow we plan, and the day after we execute, assuming we're all still breathing by then. They walked in silence for a block, their boots echoing off the storefronts, the town settling into its nightly rhythm of gambling, drinking, and violence conducted in shadows. You ever think about what happens after? Marco asked suddenly. After what? After we bring Vance down. After the gold's recovered and your father's killer is dead or arrested. What happens to you? Red had thought about it, late at night when sleep wouldn't come and the future stretched out like an empty road. I haven't gotten that far yet. Maybe you should. Because revenge has a way of consuming a man until there's nothing left but the wanting. And when the wanting's gone, you're left with a hole you can't fill. Marco tapped ash from his cigar. I've seen it before. Men who live for one purpose, and when that purpose was fulfilled, they didn't know how to live at all. You worried about my soul, Marco? I'm worried about my investment. Dead men can't pay their debts, and hollow men aren't much better. Despite everything, Rhett almost smiled. I'll keep that in mind. They parted ways at the next corner, Marco heading toward whatever den of vice he called home, Rhett turning toward the house that no longer felt like one. The walk gave him time to think, to turn Tommy's information over in his mind, to see the shape of what was coming. Vance's office the day after tomorrow. 2 hours to search it, find the ledgers, locate evidence that would stand up in a court of law. Then get out before Vance's men realized they'd been compromised. Simple in theory, deadly in practice. And somewhere in all of it, he'd have to face Garrett. The man who'd pulled the trigger, who'd murdered Jacob Calder in cold blood for money and orders. That confrontation was coming, inevitable as sunrise, and Rhett wasn't sure what he'd do when it arrived. The law said arrest, trial, hanging. Justice served cold and proper. But the desert had different laws, and sometimes cold justice wasn't enough. He was still wrestling with that thought when he reached home and found Delilah waiting on his porch, a saddlebag at her feet and a Winchester across her knees. You always greet visitors with a rifle? Rhett asked. Only the ones I'm not sure about. Lucky for you, I've decided you're probably trustworthy. She stood, slinging the rifle over her shoulder. Got something for you. She hefted the saddlebag and followed him inside. Rhett lit a lamp and Delilah spread papers across the kitchen table, detailed maps, floor plans, sketches of buildings and surrounding streets. Vance's office, she said, tapping the largest sheet. 2 stories, accessed by an external staircase on the south side. The first floor is storage, mostly liquor for the saloon, some dry goods for the general store. Second floor is Vance's private domain. 3 rooms, main office, small bedroom for when he works late, and a storage closet that doubles as an armory. Rhett studied the layout, cross-referencing it with Tommy's crude map. They matched, which meant Tommy had been telling the truth. Guards? He asked. Always 2. They rotate from Vance's personal security detail, so they're professionals, not saloon drunks playing tough. Armed with rifles and sidearms, trained to shoot first and never bother with questions. Delilah pulled out another sheet. But here's the interesting part. The back entrance Tommy mentioned, it's real. There's a door connecting the storage room to the general store's stockroom. Vance uses it to move goods without being seen, and more importantly, to move money. Is it guarded? Not usually. The thinking is that the front guards are enough, and the door itself is locked with a deadbolt from the office side, but she smiled. Locks can be picked, and I happen to know the general store closes at sundown. After that, it's empty until morning. Rhett saw the shape of it now. We go in through the general store, pick the connecting door, search the office while Vance's men are at the ranch. Exactly. In and out before anyone realizes we were there. Delilah's smile faded. But we need to move fast. 2 hours sounds generous until you're actually in there, trying to crack a safe and sort through years of records. Every minute we're inside is a minute something can go wrong. What about the safe combination? That's where things get tricky. Tommy didn't know it, and I don't have a source who does, so either we bring someone who can crack it, or we improvise. You know any safe crackers? 1. Fellow named Silas Grant. Used to work for Vance until he got caught skimming. Vance broke both his hands as a warning, but Silas learned to work with his injuries. He's good, but he's expensive and unreliable. Marco would hate that. Another expense, another risk factor. But without the safe open, they'd be searching blind. Can you reach him? I can try. No promises. Silas doesn't like coming out of hiding. Delilah gathered her maps. There's one more thing you should know. I heard through my contacts that Vance is getting suspicious. He knows someone's been asking questions and he's tightening security. That meeting with the investors, it's partly legitimate business, but it's also a show of force. He's bringing in extra men, making sure everyone knows he's untouchable. Then we prove him wrong. Brave words. Let's hope they don't end up carved on your tombstone. She headed for the door, then paused. Your sister get off all right? This afternoon. She's safe. Good. At least someone in your family has sense. Delilah's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, your father would probably be proud of you. Stupid, reckless, and bound to get yourself killed, but proud. Before Rhett could respond, she slipped out into the night, leaving him alone with maps and plans and the creeping certainty that he was in far deeper than he'd ever intended. The next day crawled by like a wounded animal. Rhett spent the morning gathering supplies, rope, oil for the hinges, dark clothes for moving unseen. He cleaned his guns again, checked his ammunition, made mental notes of every detail that could mean the difference between success and death. Around noon, Marco appeared with news that Tommy had been transferred successfully. The drunk was on a train to Denver, traveling under the name Thomas Richardson, with enough money to start over and strict instructions to stay silent. One loose end tied off. But for every end they secured, 2 more seemed to unravel. Word on the street was that Vance had nearly beaten one of his own men unconscious for failing to report a stranger asking questions near the ranch. Fear was spreading through his organization like wildfire, making people paranoid, triggering a cascade of suspicion that could expose their plans before they even began. We need to move soon, Marco said, pacing Rhett's kitchen, before Vance locks everything down completely. Tomorrow's the meeting. We stick to the plan. The plan assumes a certain level of predictability. If Vance starts changing his routines, posting extra guards, canceling the meeting, he won't cancel. Too much money at stake, too much pride invested in showing strength. Rhett spread Delilah's maps on the table again. We go tomorrow. Noon, when his attention is divided. In through the general store, out through the same route. Clean and quiet. And if it's not clean, if someone sees us, if the alarm gets raised, then we adapt. Marco laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're starting to sound like a criminal, Calder. Your father would be horrified. My father's dead because he played by the rules. Maybe it's time someone broke them. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Marco studied Rhett's face, searching for something, then nodded slowly. All right, we break the rules, but we do it smart, and we do it together. Agreed? Agreed. That evening, Delilah returned with Silas Grant in tow. The safecracker was a small man, wiry and nervous, with hands that had healed crooked and eyes that never stopped moving. He looked like he expected betrayal from every direction and had plans for countering it. This is a bad idea, were his first words. Breaking into Vance's office is suicide. Good thing we're not asking you to break in, Rhett said, just to open a safe once we're already inside. Same difference. If I'm caught anywhere near Vance's property, he'll finish what he started. Silas held up his twisted hands. These were a warning. Next time it's my neck. Next time won't come if you do this right. Marco set a small leather pouch on the table. Gold coins clinked inside. 500 now. 500 more when the job's done. Silas stared at the pouch, war playing across his features. Greed versus fear, a battle as old as time. Finally, greed won. It usually did. 1,000 total, Half up front. He snatched the pouch. And if anything goes wrong, I'm gone. I don't die for anybody's vendetta. Fair enough, Rhett said. We go in tomorrow, noon sharp. Delilah will guide us through the general store. You'll have 10 minutes to crack the safe, maybe 15 if we're lucky. I can do it in 5 if it's a standard tumbler lock. Vance isn't as smart as he thinks he is. Silas's crooked fingers flexed unconsciously. But after it's open, I'm out. I don't care what you find or what you do with it. My job ends when that door swings open. Understood. They spent the next hour going over the plan, entry points, timing, contingencies for a dozen different disasters. By the time Silas left, the sun had set, and the plan was as solid as they could make it given the variables. Delilah lingered after the safecracker disappeared. You know this could all blow up in our faces, she said quietly. One mistake, one wrong turn, and we're all dead. I know. And you're still going through with it. What choice do I have? You could walk away. Take what you know to the federal marshals. Let them handle it. Rhett met her eyes. And how long would that take? Weeks? Months? While they investigate and gather evidence and build a case? And all that time Vance would be destroying proof, killing witnesses, covering his tracks. He shook his head. No, it has to be now. It has to be us. Delilah was quiet for a long moment. Then she pulled out a small pistol, checked its load, and set it on the table. My backup piece. .22 caliber, not much stopping power, but it's small and quiet. Good for close work if things go bad. She slid it toward him. Take it, just in case. I've got weapons. You've got a Colt that sounds like thunder when it fires. This is for when you need someone dead and can't afford the noise. Her expression was grim. Tomorrow's going to test all of us. I'd rather we all walk out. Rhett took the small pistol, felt its weight. It fit in his palm like it was made for dark work and darker choices. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we're alive on the other side. She left, and Rhett sat alone in the kitchen, surrounded by maps and weapons and the ghost of his father's disapproval. Jacob Calder had believed in law and order, in doing things the right way even when the wrong way was easier. He'd raised his children to value honesty, integrity, justice served through proper channels, and it had gotten him murdered in the dirt with 3 bullets in his back. Rhett wondered if there was a lesson in that, wondered if sometimes the right way was just the slow way of dying, wondered if his father, given a second chance, would choose differently. He'd never know. The dead kept their counsel, but the living had to make choices, and Rhett Calder had made his. Tomorrow he'd walk into Salazar Vance's stronghold and take what he needed to burn the man's empire to ash. He'd do it with criminals and gamblers at his back, with stolen knowledge and desperate plans, with violence waiting in his holster and revenge beating in his chest. And if it cost him his soul, well, some debts had to be paid in full. He spent that night cleaning his weapons one final time, checking his gear, making sure everything was ready. Around midnight, he walked out onto the porch and stared at the stars, trying to find meaning in their cold light. The desert stretched away in all directions, vast and uncaring, swallowing secrets and spitting out bones. Somewhere out there, his father's killer slept soundly, confident in his protection, certain that money and fear would keep him safe. Tomorrow, Rhett would teach him different. Tomorrow, the reckoning began. The next morning arrived bright and merciless, the sun climbing into a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Rhett ate a cold breakfast, checked his weapons for the 5th time, and tried to quiet the drumming in his chest that felt too much like fear. Marco arrived first, dressed in black and looking almost professional. Gone was the easy smile and casual demeanor. In its place was something harder, sharper, the face of a man who'd killed before and would again if necessary. You ready for this? The gambler asked. As ready as I'll ever be. That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. Delilah showed up next, armed to the teeth and wearing an expression that could cut glass. She carried a small bag of tools, lockpicks, wedges, oil, everything they'd need to make entry silent and clean. Silas is already in position, she said, holed up in the boarding house across from the general store. He'll meet us inside at noon. And Vance's guards? According to my source, they pulled 6 men from the office detail for the ranch meeting. That leaves 1 man at the bottom of the stairs, 1 at the top. Standard rotation. Delilah pulled out her pocket watch. Right now, Vance is at his ranch, schmoozing investors and showing off his operation. We've got a window, but it's narrow. Then let's not waste it. They moved through town separately, drifting toward the general store from different directions, trying not to draw attention. The streets were busy with midday traffic, wagons delivering goods, cowboys fresh from the range, townspeople conducting business. Just another day in a frontier town built on commerce and corruption. The general store sat on a corner, 2 stories of weathered wood and dusty windows. Rhett slipped into the alley beside it, waiting while Delilah worked the back lock. It took her less than a minute. The door swung open silently, revealing darkness and the smell of flour and coffee. They moved inside, letting their eyes adjust. The stockroom was cramped and crowded. Shelves stacked with goods, crates piled haphazardly. At the far end, barely visible behind a rack of tools, was the door Tommy had mentioned. It looked like part of the wall, designed to be overlooked. Delilah moved to it, running her fingers along the edge until she found the lock. This one was trickier. A deadbolt from the other side, designed to prevent entry from the store. But she'd come prepared. A thin metal shim slid into the gap between door and frame, working the bolt slowly, carefully, making almost no sound. 5 minutes. 10. Sweat beaded on Delilah's forehead despite the cool interior. Then, with a soft click, the bolt slid free. She looked back at Rhett and Marco, nodded once, and eased the door open. Beyond was another storage room, this one neater, more organized. Crates of liquor, mostly, stacked along the walls. A narrow staircase led upward, disappearing into shadows. And at the base of those stairs stood a man with a rifle, his back to them, watching the street through a grimy window. Rhett's hand went to his gun, but Delilah caught his wrist, shook her head. Too loud. Too risky. One shot and the whole plan collapsed. She pulled her knife instead, moving forward with a grace that spoke of practice. 3 steps. 4. Close enough to strike. The guard must have heard something. A creak of floorboard, a shift in air pressure. He started to turn, rifle coming up, mouth opening to shout. Delilah was faster. The knife plunged into his back between the ribs, finding the heart with surgical precision. The guard's shout became a wet gasp. His rifle clattered to the floor. He collapsed, twitching, dying silently while Delilah held him down. It was over in seconds. Marco stepped forward, helped lower the body the rest of the way. Well, there's no going back now. There never was, Delilah said quietly, cleaning her blade. Upstairs, fast. They climbed the staircase, weapons drawn, every sense alert. At the top was another guard, sitting in a chair beside a heavy wooden door, reading a newspaper and looking bored. He looked up as they appeared, eyes widening, hand reaching for his gun. Rhett shot him. The small pistol Delilah had given him coughed once, barely louder than a cough. The guard jerked, a red hole appearing in his forehead, and slumped sideways. The newspaper drifted to the floor. 2 men dead in under a minute. 2 men who'd probably never expected to die on a Tuesday afternoon guarding an empty office. Rhett felt nothing. No guilt, no horror, just cold purpose burning behind his eyes. Delilah tried the door. Locked, predictably. She pulled out her picks and went to work while Marco dragged the guard's body into the shadows and Rhett watched the street below. The lock gave with a soft snick. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Salazar Vance's office sprawled before them. Rich carpet, polished wood, furniture that cost more than most men made in a year. And on the southwest wall, just as Tommy had said, hung a painting of a mountain landscape. Delilah crossed the room and pulled the painting aside, revealing a safe built into the wall. Right on cue, Silas Grant materialized from the connecting bedroom, moving like a ghost. He'd come in through another entrance, some route of his own devising. 15 minutes, he muttered, kneeling before the safe. That's all you've got. Maybe less. His crooked fingers moved over the dial, surprisingly nimble despite their injuries. He pressed his ear to the metal, listening, turning, feeling for the tumblers. Rhett and Marco spread out, searching the rest of the office. Drawers, cabinets, shelves, looking for ledgers, documents, anything that would prove Vance's crimes. They found them in the desk. 3 heavy ledgers, bound in leather, filled with entries in Vance's cramped handwriting. Dates, amounts, names. A complete record of robberies, bribes, murders for hire. Years of criminal enterprise, documented with accountant-like precision. He really did write it all down, Marco breathed, flipping through pages. The arrogant bastard actually kept records. Why wouldn't he? Delilah said from across the room. Who'd dare look? Who'd dare use it against him? We would, Rhett said grimly, gathering the ledgers. We are. Behind them, the safe clicked. Silas pulled the handle and the heavy door swung open. Inside was more than they'd hoped for. Stacks of cash, deeds to property, maps marked with locations, and in the very back, a small strongbox. Silas pulled it out, opened it with a hairpin. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were several $1,000s in gold coins. Part of the Wells Fargo robbery, almost certainly. Evidence, proof. That's it, Silas said, standing quickly. I'm done. I'm gone. Good luck, and don't follow me. He disappeared back into the bedroom, vanishing as quickly as he'd appeared, taking his $500 and whatever remained of his conscience. Rhett stared at the gold, thinking about his father, about the price of justice, about how strange it was that yellow metal could cost so many lives. We need to go, Delilah urged. Now, before... Below, a door slammed open. Voices, angry and alert. Bootsteps on stairs, multiple sets, moving fast. Before that, Delilah finished. The footsteps hammered up the stairs like thunder, and Rhett's mind went ice cold, calculating angles and exits in the half-second before the door exploded inward. 3 men burst through, guns drawn, and the office erupted into chaos. Marco fired first, his pistol barking twice. The lead man went down hard, clutching his chest. The second dove behind a heavy desk, returning fire wildly. The third charged straight at Delilah, who sidestepped like a dancer and opened his throat with her knife in one fluid motion. Blood sprayed across the expensive carpet. Rhett grabbed the ledgers and the strongbox, shoving them into the canvas bag at his feet, while bullets splintered wood and shattered glass around him. The man behind the desk was screaming something about backup, about reinforcements coming. They had maybe a minute. Less. The bedroom, Delilah shouted, already moving. Silas's route! They ran, Marco providing covering fire while Rhett and Delilah crashed through the bedroom door. It was small and sparse, just a cot and a washstand, but Silas had left the window open. A rope hung from the sill, disappearing down into the alley below. Outside, more voices, men shouting orders, organizing. The trap was closing fast. Go! Marco shoved Rhett toward the window. I'll hold them. Like hell you will. We go together or not at all. Touching, but impractical. Marco fired twice more through the doorway, forcing the remaining guard to duck. Someone has to slow them down, and I'm the best shot. Now move before I shoot you myself. Delilah was already climbing out, sliding down the rope with practiced ease. Rhett hesitated, torn between survival and leaving Marco behind. The gambler solved the problem by physically pushing him toward the window. Your father died for this. Don't waste it being noble. Go! Rhett went, grabbing the rope and dropping fast, his hands burning from the friction. He hit the alley running, Delilah already ahead of him, the bag of evidence heavy against his back. Behind and above, gunfire rattled like hailstones. Marco's voice rose in a string of creative profanity, then more shots, then the sound of breaking furniture. They burst out of the alley onto the main street just as riders appeared at both ends of the block. Vance's men, 6 or 7 of them, guns already drawn. Through the mercantile! Delilah grabbed Rhett's arm, dragging him toward the nearest storefront. They crashed through the door, startling customers, the proprietor shouting protests they ignored. Out the back, into another alley, then left into a narrow gap between buildings barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Rhett's shoulders scraped brick as he ran, his breathing harsh, every sense screaming danger. They emerged near the livery stable. Delilah whistled sharply, and 2 horses appeared as if conjured, hers and Rhett's, saddled and ready. She'd planned for this, prepared for everything going wrong. They mounted and rode, not toward the edge of town, but deeper in, toward the residential streets where Vance's men wouldn't expect them to run. A gamble, but Delilah knew this town better than Rhett ever would. Behind them, chaos spread like wildfire. Shouts, gunshots, the sound of many boots pursuing, but the narrow streets and tight corners worked in their favor, breaking up the pursuit, forcing Vance's men to split up. They cut through a yard, jumped a fence, galloped down an alley so tight Rhett's stirrups scraped the wall, then out again, onto a side street, then another turn, and another, until Rhett had lost all sense of direction. Finally, Delilah pulled up behind an abandoned warehouse on the east side. They dismounted quickly, leading the horses inside through a broken door into shadows and the smell of rotting wood. For a long moment, the only sound was their harsh breathing and the distant shouts of men searching in the wrong places. Marco, Rhett said when he could speak, knew what he was signing up for. Delilah's voice was flat, emotionless. He bought us time. We use it or dishonor his sacrifice. We don't know he's dead. We don't know he's alive either, and we can't go back. She pulled the canvas bag off Rhett's shoulder, opened it, checked the contents. The ledgers were intact, the gold still there. This is what your father died for. What Marco's probably dying for right now. We secure it, or none of this matters. The cold logic was irrefutable, but it sat in Rhett's stomach like poison. He'd brought Marco into this. The gambler's blood, if spilled, was on his hands, but Delilah was right. Going back meant dying, and dying meant Vance won. Where do we go? He asked. I've got a place. Old miner's cabin, about 5 miles north. No one's used it in years, and no one knows I know about it. She was already moving, checking the street through gaps in the warehouse walls. We hole up there, wait for the heat to die down, then figure out our next move. Next move is finding a federal marshal. Next move is surviving the day. After that, we plan. Delilah mounted her horse. Come on, they'll be expanding the search soon, and I'd rather not be in town when they do. They rode out through the back of the warehouse, into the scrubland beyond town, keeping to the low ground where dust wouldn't betray them. The sun beat down mercilessly, turning the world into a furnace, sweat soaking through Rhett's shirt within minutes. Behind them, the town receded into heat shimmer and distance. Ahead, the desert stretched empty and unforgiving. They rode hard for an hour, pushing the horses to their limits, before Delilah finally slowed and took them into a narrow canyon cut between red rock walls. The temperature dropped slightly in the shade, and the sound of their passage echoed strangely off stone. The canyon wound upward, growing narrower, until finally it opened into a small valley hidden from the surrounding terrain. And there, tucked against the far wall like a secret, was the cabin. It was small and weathered, more shack than shelter, but the roof looked intact, and the walls were solid. A good place to hide, to rest, to figure out what the hell to do next. They unsaddled the horses, let them drink from a spring that bubbled up near the cabin, then led them into the partial shade of an overhang. Inside the cabin, dust covered everything, and a family of mice had taken residence in one corner, but it was defensible and hidden. Delilah barred the door and checked the windows, 2 small openings covered with oiled paper that let in light but obscured vision from outside. Satisfied, she finally allowed herself to collapse onto a rickety chair. We made it, she said, sounding surprised. Rhett set the canvas bag on the table, stared at it. 3 ledgers and a strongbox of gold. The sum total of everything they'd risked, everything they'd lost, everything his father had died to expose. He opened the first ledger, started reading. The entries went back 5 years, meticulously documented. Bribes paid to Sheriff Drummond, to the mayor, to territorial officials whose names Rhett recognized from newspapers. Payments to gunmen for jobs completed. Some listed by name, others just by deed. Claim Jumper Brown, $75. Jacob Calder had probably known Brown, might have called him neighbor. Wells Fargo robbery, $12,000 divided 6 ways. Tommy's payday, bought with death and fear. Jay Calder, $500. The price of his father's life, written in Vance's hand with business-like efficiency, as if murder was just another transaction. The entry was dated 2 days before Jacob died. Proof that it was planned, ordered, executed with cold calculation. Rhett's hands shook as he turned the pages, rage building like a storm behind his ribs. Every entry was another crime, another life destroyed, another piece of evidence that Salazar Vance was exactly the monster everyone feared and no one would challenge. Until now. This is enough, he said quietly. This is enough to hang him 10 times over. If we can get it to someone who'll act on it. Delilah had found a canteen somewhere, was taking long swallows of stale water. Drummond won't. Half the territorial officials are on Vance's payroll. We need someone outside the system, someone who can't be bought. Federal marshals. Nearest one is in Ridgemont, 3 days' ride. We'd have to get there alive, convince him this is legitimate, and pray Vance doesn't have connections there too. You have a better idea? Delilah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then, there's a circuit judge due through Silver Creek next week. Judge Harlan Moss. Old bastard, mean as a snake, but honest. Can't be bought, can't be intimidated. If we could get this to him. Silver Creek's 2 days east, closer than Ridgemont. And probably crawling with Vance's men by now. He'll have sent riders to every town within 100 miles, spreading the word, offering rewards. We're wanted, Rhett. Probably with a price on our heads that'll make desperate men do stupid things. Then we move at night, stay off the main roads, and trust that greed makes people sloppy. Or we wait here until things cool down, then make our move when Vance thinks we've run to Mexico or died in the desert. Rhett looked at the ledgers, thought about Marco holding off Vance's men, about Tommy drinking himself sick in a jail cell, about his father bleeding out on a dirt road with no one to help him. We don't have time to wait. Every day Vance stays free is another day he's destroying evidence, killing witnesses, consolidating power. He met Delilah's eyes. We leave tonight. We ride for Silver Creek, and we don't stop until this is in Judge Moss's hands. You're going to get us killed. Probably. But we'll die doing something that matters. Delilah laughed, short and sharp. Your father really did raise you stubborn. Fine, we ride tonight, but we rest now because once we start, we don't stop. They spent the afternoon in silence, each lost in their own thoughts. Rhett cleaned his guns, counted his ammunition, tried not to think about Marco and whether the gambler was dead or captured or somehow miraculously escaped. Delilah dozed in the corner, her rifle across her lap, the sleep of someone who'd learned to rest anywhere, any time. As the sun crawled toward the horizon, painting the canyon walls in shades of blood and fire, Rhett stepped outside and looked back toward town. Smoke rose in a thin column from somewhere in the center. The saloon, maybe, or Vance's office. Evidence destroyed, loose ends erased, the crime boss covering his tracks with the efficiency of a man who'd done this before. But he'd missed something. He'd left 3 ledgers and a strong box of gold in a safe he thought was impregnable, guarded by an office he thought was untouchable, and that oversight was going to cost him everything. Rhett allowed himself a cold smile and went back inside. They left as full dark settled, riding under stars so bright they cast shadows. Delilah led them through terrain she knew intimately, avoiding roads and trails, sticking to dry washes and rocky ground that wouldn't hold tracks. They rode in silence, conserving energy, staying alert for any sign of pursuit. Around midnight, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a cold meal of jerky and hardtack. Delilah checked their bearings by the stars, adjusted their course slightly northward. We're making good time, she said quietly. If we keep this pace, we'll reach Silver Creek by tomorrow evening. Assuming we don't run into Vance's men. Assuming that, yes. They remounted and rode on, and the night deepened around them, vast and empty and full of hidden dangers. Dawn found them in broken country, all mesas and arroyos, the kind of terrain that could hide an army or swallow a man without trace. They holed up in a shallow cave while the sun climbed, taking turns sleeping and watching, neither willing to trust that they were truly alone. Rhett woke from restless sleep around noon, his body aching from the saddle and the rough ground. Delilah was at the cave mouth, staring at something in the distance with an expression that made his stomach drop. What is it? Riders, 4 of them, maybe 5, 2 miles out and moving this direction. Rhett joined her, shading his eyes against the glare. He could just make out the distant figures, dark shapes against the pale desert. You think they're tracking us? Hard to say. Could be Vance's men, could be ranchers, could be bandits, but I don't want to wait around to find out. She was already gathering their gear. We move now while we've got distance. They saddled quickly and rode deeper into the maze of canyons, choosing paths that doubled back and crossed streams, anything to break their trail. The riders followed, not directly but persistently, like wolves trailing wounded prey. By late afternoon, Rhett was certain they were being hunted. The riders had closed the distance to a mile, spreading out to cover more ground, working with the coordination of professionals. We need to lose them before dark, Delilah said. pushing her horse faster. Once the sun sets, they'll have trackers reading signs by firelight, and we'll be running blind. Can we outrun them? Not on tired horses in unfamiliar terrain. We need to outsmart them. She led them into a narrow defile, barely wide enough for the horses, then up a steep trail that switched back and forth up the canyon wall. At the top, she dismounted and worked quickly, arranging rocks to cover their tracks, then led the horses into a dense thicket of juniper that grew along the rim. We wait here. If they're tracking us, they'll follow the defile. When they realize we didn't come out the other end, they'll have to backtrack. That buys us time. They hunkered down in the juniper, weapons ready, watching the canyon below. The sun sank lower, turning the rocks orange and red. Minutes stretched like hours. Then the riders appeared, moving cautiously up the defile. Rhett counted 5 men, all armed, all moving with the careful precision of experienced manhunters. The lead rider was a big man with a scar across his throat that was visible even at this distance. Garrett. Rhett's hand tightened on his rifle. The man who'd killed his father was 100 yards away, vulnerable, exposed in the narrow canyon. 1 shot. That's all it would take. As if reading his mind, Delilah's hand clamped on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Miss, and they know exactly where we are. Hit, and the others come up here hunting. Either way, we die. He killed my father. And he'll answer for it. But not here. Not now. We're too close to Silver Creek to throw it away on revenge." Every fiber of Rhett's being screamed to take the shot, to end Garrett right here and now. To hell with the consequences. His finger tightened on the trigger, the rifle coming up almost of its own accord. Delilah grabbed the barrel, forced it down. "Don't you dare! Don't you dare dishonor your father's sacrifice by dying stupid." The words hit harder than a fist. Rhett's breath hissed out between his teeth, his whole body shaking with the effort of standing down. Below, Garrett and his men reached the end of the defile, realized their quarry had somehow escaped. Curses drifted up, angry and frustrated. They milled around for a few minutes, searching for tracks, finding nothing in the growing darkness. Finally, Garrett shouted orders. 3 men headed back the way they'd come. Garrett and 1 other started climbing the trail up the canyon wall, heading straight toward the thicket. "Move," Delilah breathed. "Now, quiet." They led the horses deeper into the juniper, moving by feel in the gathering darkness, every step carefully placed. Behind them, Garrett's voice grew closer, barking questions to his companion. The juniper thicket was denser than it looked, and the horses began to balk, whickering nervously. Delilah gentled hers with whispers and steady hands, but Rhett's mount was spooked, ears back, ready to bolt. 20 yards away, Garrett crested the rim. Rhett clamped his hand over his horse's nose, willing it to silence. The animal's eyes rolled white, but it held still, trembling under his grip. Garrett stood silhouetted against the dying light, scanning the rim. His companion joined him, both men breathing hard from the climb. "Nothing up here but rocks and scrub," the companion said. "They didn't just vanish, check the thicket." They moved toward the juniper, and Rhett felt the cold certainty of discovery settling over him. In seconds, they'd be found. In seconds, this would end in blood. His free hand went to his pistol, Delilah's gift, the small, quiet killer. If it came down to it, he'd take Garrett first. The other man was just a soldier following orders. But Garrett had earned his bullet. 5 yards. 3. A coyote yipped in the distance, then another, then a whole chorus of them rising into the night. The horses down in the canyon answered with nervous whinnies, stamping and pulling at their tethers. Garrett stopped, listening. His companion tugged his sleeve. "Boss, we're losing light. We camp here? Try again at dawn?" Garrett was silent for a long moment, so close Rhett could hear his breathing. Then, "Yeah, all right, but double watch tonight. They're close. I can feel it." They retreated back down the trail, and Rhett nearly collapsed with relief. Delilah waited another 10 minutes before moving, leading them away from the rim in absolute silence, putting distance between them and Garrett's camp. They walked the horses for an hour, then 2, until the stars were out in full force and the night had swallowed all landmarks. Finally, Delilah stopped in a dry wash overhung with cottonwoods. "We rest here for a few hours." They won't track in darkness, and by dawn we'll be long gone. Rhett tended the horses while Delilah scouted their perimeter. When she returned, she sat beside him in the darkness, her rifle across her knees. "That was close," she said quietly. "Too close. You wanted to shoot him." "Yes." "I'm glad you didn't. Are you?" She was quiet for a moment. "Your father went to his death trying to do things the right way, trying to use law and evidence and justice. It got him killed, but it also got us this." She tapped the canvas bag at Rhett's feet. "If you'd shot Garrett back there, you'd have become exactly what Vance is, a killer who solves problems with bullets. And then who's to say you're better than him?" "I'm better because my reasons are just." That's what every killer tells himself, that his reasons justify his actions, that his cause makes him righteous. Delilah shook her head. "Your father believed in law because law is what separates civilization from chaos. You want to honor him? Then see this through the right way. Get these ledgers to Judge Moss. Let the system work, even if it's broken, even if it's slow. Because the alternative is becoming Vance with a different face." Rhett knew she was right, hated that she was right. But knowing didn't make it easier. What if the system fails? What if Moss is corrupt too, or scared, or unwilling to act? Then we try the federal marshals, and if they fail, we go higher. We don't stop until someone with power and integrity hears us. She met his eyes in the darkness. "But we give the law its chance first. We owe your father that much." They sat in silence after that, listening to the night sounds. Wind in the cottonwoods, distant coyotes, the steady breathing of exhausted horses. Somewhere behind them, Garrett was making camp, planning tomorrow's hunt. Somewhere ahead, Silver Creek waited with its circuit judge and the promise of justice. And between those 2 points, Rhett Calder wrestled with the difference between revenge and righteousness, between what he wanted to do and what he needed to do. Dawn would bring answers, or more questions, or violence. But tonight, in this brief respite, there was only the darkness and the weight of choices not yet made. They rode through this pre-dawn gray, pushing hard, knowing Garrett would be on their trail as soon as there was light to track by. The terrain gradually shifted from broken canyons to rolling hills dotted with sage and creosote, the land opening up as they approached the territory where Silver Creek sat nestled in a valley between 2 ridgelines. By mid-morning, they could see smoke from the town's chimneys rising in the distance. By noon, they were close enough to make out individual buildings. And by early afternoon, as they crested the final ridge overlooking Silver Creek, they found their path blocked by 4 mounted men with rifles leveled. The lead rider was a grizzled man in his 60s with a tin star pinned to his vest and eyes like flint. "That's far enough," he said. "You'd be Rhett Calder and Delilah Cross, I'm guessing. Got a wire about you yesterday. Says you're wanted for murder and theft, among other things." Rhett's hand drifted toward his gun, but Delilah kicked his ankle, a sharp warning. "We're wanted by Salazar Vance," she said calmly. "But the charges are lies. We've got evidence that proves it, evidence of Vance's crimes going back 5 years. We need to see Judge Moss." "Judge Moss isn't in town yet. Won't be until tomorrow." The sheriff shifted in his saddle. "In the meantime, I've got orders to detain anyone matching your descriptions. So you can come peaceful, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Rhett looked at the 4 rifles pointed at them, at Delilah's warning expression, at the town spread out below where safety was supposed to wait. And he realized with sinking certainty that the system Delilah believed in was about to put them right back in Vance's hands. The silence stretched thin as wire. 4 rifles against 2 exhausted fugitives, the odds calculated and found wanting. Rhett's mind raced through possibilities, draw and fire, try to run, surrender, and hope. But every option led to the same dead end. Then Delilah did something unexpected. She dismounted slowly, hands visible, and pulled the canvas bag from her saddle. "Sheriff, I'm going to reach into this bag. I'm not going for a weapon. I'm going to show you something that'll change your mind about detaining us." The sheriff's rifle didn't waver. "Nice and slow, then." She opened the bag, pulled out one of the ledgers, held it up. "This is Salazar Vance's personal record of criminal activity. 5 years of bribes, murders, robberies, all documented in his own handwriting. There are 2 more ledgers in here, plus gold stolen from Wells Fargo. We're bringing it to Judge Moss as evidence." Or you're bringing stolen property and doctored books to cover your own crimes, the sheriff countered. Vance's wire said you'd have a story, said you might even have forged documents to support it. Then look at the ledger yourself. See if it reads like a forgery. Delilah took a step forward, offering the book. You're a lawman. You know the difference between truth and lies. The sheriff hesitated, then gestured to one of his deputies. Check it, but keep your distance. The deputy dismounted warily, took the ledger from Delilah's outstretched hand, carried it back to the sheriff. The older man flipped through pages, his weathered face unchanging, but something shifted in his eyes as he read. Minutes passed. The sun beat down. Rhett's hand stayed near his gun, ready for the moment this went wrong. Finally, the sheriff closed the ledger. This is detailed. I'll give you that. Names, dates, amounts. If it's forged, someone put considerable effort into it. It's not forged, Rhett said. My father was Jacob Calder. He found out about Vance's robbery of the Wells Fargo shipment. Vance had him murdered to keep him quiet. This ledger proves it. There's an entry 2 days before my father died. $500 paid to a man named Garrett for handling the Calder problem. Recognition flickered across the sheriff's face. I knew your father. Good man. Heard about his death? They said it was drifters. They lied. Vance's men killed him, and now they're trying to kill us before we can expose the truth. Rhett kept his voice steady, reasonable. All we're asking is that you hold us safely until Judge Moss arrives tomorrow. Let him review the evidence. If he thinks we're lying, then charge us. But if he sees what we've seen, Vance goes down. The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, studying Rhett's face, Delilah's stance, the worn canvas bag with its cargo of damning truth. Whatever he saw there must have satisfied something, because he slowly lowered his rifle. All right, I'll hold you until the judge arrives, but you're still under arrest, and you're still going in cells. If this evidence is real, Moss will sort it out. If it's not, he left the threat unfinished. Fair enough, Delilah said. They rode into Silver Creek under armed escort, attracting stares from townspeople who recognized the spectacle of prisoners being brought in. The jail was small but solid, and the sheriff separated them into different cells despite Rhett's protests. Standard procedure, the older man said, locking Rhett's door. You'll get your hearing tomorrow when the judge arrives. Until then, you eat, you rest, and you stay quiet. He took the canvas bag with him, and Rhett watched their evidence disappear down the hallway with the sick certainty that something would go wrong, that Vance's reach would extend even here, that they'd come so close only to fail at the final step. Night fell. A deputy brought food, beans and cornbread, simple but edible. Rhett forced himself to eat, knowing he'd need strength for whatever came next. Through the wall, he could hear Delilah moving in her cell, pacing like a caged wolf. Around midnight, raised voices erupted from the front office. Rhett moved to the cell door, pressing his ear against the bars. The sheriff's voice, angry and unyielding, arguing with someone whose words were too muffled to make out. Then silence. Then footsteps retreating. Then nothing. Minutes later, the sheriff appeared in the cell block, his face grim. We've got a problem. Vance sent men, 6 of them, arrived an hour ago, demanding I turn you over. Said they've got authorization from the territorial governor to transport you back for trial. Rhett's stomach dropped. And I told them to go to hell. I don't care what paper they're waving. Nobody takes prisoners from my jail without proper documentation and a judge's order. The sheriff's jaw was set hard. But they're not leaving. They're camped outside town, watching, waiting. When Judge Moss arrives tomorrow, they'll make their move. Could get ugly. How many deputies do you have? 3, counting myself. Not enough if it comes to shooting. Then let us out. Give us our guns and let us fight. Can't do that. You're still under arrest. The sheriff paused. But I can make sure those ledgers get to Judge Moss, even if you don't. That's something. It wasn't enough, but it was all they had. Rhett nodded slowly. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. We've got to survive the night first. The hours crawled past. Rhett dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every sound, expecting Vance's men to come crashing through the walls. But the night remained quiet, tense as a drawn bowstring but unbroken. Dawn arrived like a reprieve. With it came the rattle of a wagon and the sound of many horses. Rhett moved to the small window in his cell, peering out at the dusty street beyond. A fine carriage had arrived, pulled by matched horses, flanked by armed outriders. From it emerged a tall man in his 70s with a shock of white hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent a lifetime passing judgment. Judge Harlan Moss had arrived right on schedule, and with him came a small army of federal marshals. The sight made Rhett's heart leap. The sheriff hadn't been lying about Moss's reputation. The judge traveled with protection, real protection, men who answered to federal authority and couldn't be bought by territorial crime bosses. Within the hour, Rhett and Delilah were escorted from their cells into the sheriff's office. Judge Moss sat behind the desk, the 3 ledgers spread before him, the strongbox of gold coins open at his elbow. He looked up as they entered, his eyes sharp and assessing. "Mr. Calder, Miss Cross, I've been reading some very interesting material this morning." Moss tapped the ledgers. "If authentic, these documents represent a criminal conspiracy spanning half a decade and involving some very prominent names. If forged, they represent an elaborate attempt to frame Salazar Vance for crimes he didn't commit. So, which is it?" "They're authentic," Rhett said. "We took them from Vance's office 3 days ago. Every entry is in his handwriting. The gold is from the Wells Fargo robbery he ordered, and my father died because he found out about it. Salazar Vance claims you murdered 2 of his employees during the theft of these ledgers, that you're criminals masquerading as victims. Vance's employees were guarding an office full of evidence of his crimes. We defended ourselves when they tried to stop us from exposing the truth." Delilah's voice was steady. "And if we're criminals, why did we bring the evidence straight to you instead of running to Mexico with the gold?" Moss smiled thinly. "An excellent question, one I posed to the gentleman currently camped outside this town, demanding your custody." He closed the top ledger. They had no good answer. Hope flared in Rhett's chest. "You believe us?" "I believe evidence, and this evidence is compelling." Moss gestured to one of his marshals. "I'm issuing warrants for the arrest of Salazar Vance, a man named Garrett, and 6 others named in these ledgers for various crimes, including murder, robbery, bribery, and conspiracy. Marshal Donnelly, take 4 men and ride to Vance's ranch. Bring him in for trial." "Yes, sir." "As for you 2, Moss turned back to Rhett and Delilah, "you're still under arrest for the deaths of Vance's men. But given the circumstances, I'm releasing you on your own recognizance pending a full hearing. You'll remain in Silver Creek until this matter is resolved." It was more than Rhett had dared hope for. "Thank you, Your Honor." "Don't thank me yet. Vance won't come quietly, and when he doesn't, people will die. I'm hoping you're not among them." The judge was right. By noon, word had spread through town like wildfire. Federal marshals had issued warrants for Salazar Vance's arrest. The 6 men camped outside Silver Creek mounted up and rode hard back toward Vance's territory, carrying warning ahead of the law's arrival. Rhett stood on the sheriff's porch, watching them go, knowing what came next. Delilah joined him, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "He'll run or he'll fight. Either way, this isn't over. Then we finish it." Rhett turned to find the sheriff watching from the doorway. "I'm riding with the marshals. Vance killed my father. I've got a right to be there when they bring him in." "Judge Moss won't allow it." "Then I'll follow at a distance, but I'm going." The sheriff sighed. "Figured you'd say that. Your funeral, I suppose." By mid-afternoon, Rhett had reclaimed his horse, his weapons, and what remained of his determination. Delilah insisted on coming despite his protests, and together they rode out behind the marshals, keeping far enough back not to be officially part of the posse, but close enough to see the ending. The ride to Vance's ranch took most of the day. The sun was sinking toward the horizon when they finally saw the compound spread across the valley below. A main house, several outbuildings, corrals full of horses, and at least a dozen armed men visible in defensive positions. Marshal Donnelly rode forward alone, white flag raised, and called for Vance to surrender peacefully. His voice echoed across the valley, formal and final. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then a rifle shot cracked from the main house, kicking up dust 20 feet in front of Donnelly's horse. The marshal wheeled his mount and rode back to his men. "Well, I'd say that's answer enough. He's chosen violence." The siege began at sunset. The marshals took positions on the ridgeline overlooking the ranch, cut off escape routes, and settled in for a long standoff. Inside the compound, Vance's men fortified their positions and prepared for battle. Rhett and Delilah watched from a distance, hidden in a stand of cottonwoods, as darkness fell and fires were lit in both camps. The standoff could last hours or days, depending on how stubborn Vance felt and how much food and water he'd stockpiled. But Rhett knew his father's killer was down there somewhere, probably standing beside Vance, probably planning something desperate. And desperate men made mistakes. Around midnight, those mistakes began. A small group of riders, maybe 4 or 5, emerged from the back of the compound, riding hard toward the eastern hills where the marshal's line was thinnest. They were making a run for it, abandoning Vance to save themselves. The marshals opened fire, and the night erupted in muzzle flashes and screams. 2 riders went down immediately, the others scattered, disappearing into the darkness, pursued by mounted marshals. In the chaos, Rhett saw opportunity. The compound's back gate was open, unguarded. The defenders' attention focused on the running battle. A single man could slip through, get inside, find Vance or Garrett, or both before anyone realized. "Don't even think about it," Delilah said, reading his intention. "I have to finish this." "No, you don't. The marshals will flush them out eventually. You don't need to." But Rhett was already moving, slipping down the hillside toward the open gate, staying low, using the darkness and confusion as cover. Behind him, Delilah cursed creatively and followed, because apparently they were both crazy. They reached the compound wall, pressed against rough adobe, listening. Shouts from the front of the house, someone barking orders, the sound of men taking defensive positions. But the back was chaos, people running in all directions, some trying to escape, others trying to hold the line. Rhett slipped through the gate with Delilah at his heels. They moved along the wall of an outbuilding toward the main house where lamplight spilled from windows. If Vance was anywhere, he'd be there, in his fortress, directing his men. The back door was unguarded. They eased it open, stepped into a kitchen thick with smoke and the smell of burned coffee. Voices echoed from deeper in the house, men arguing, furniture scraping, the sound of someone loading a gun. Rhett moved through the kitchen into a hallway, following the voices to a large room that must have been Vance's office. The door was ajar, lamplight spilling out, and through the gap Rhett could see 3 men. Salazar Vance himself, a lean man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and eyes like a shark. Beside him stood Garrett, that scar across his throat livid in the lamplight, a rifle in his hands. And the third man was Sheriff Drummond, looking pale and terrified. "Can't hold them off forever," Drummond was saying. "You need to surrender, cut a deal. I don't surrender." Vance's voice was cold, controlled. "And I don't cut deals with federal marshals who think they can waltz onto my property and make demands. Then you'll die here. We all will." Better than hanging, Vance poured whiskey from a crystal decanter, his hand steady. "Garrett, take the tunnel. Get to the horses we cached in the North Canyon. Ride to Mexico and wait for word." "What about you, boss?" "I'll hold them off long enough for you to escape. Then I'll do what needs doing." Vance's smile was sharp and terrible. "I won't give them the satisfaction of a trial." So there was a tunnel, an escape route. That's how Garrett would slip away while Vance made his last stand. Rhett's jaw tightened. Not if he could help it. He kicked the door open, both guns drawn, stepping into the room before anyone could react. "Nobody's escaping. Nobody's dying by their own hand. You're all under arrest." 3 pairs of eyes turned to him. Vance cold and calculating, Garrett enraged, Drummond terrified. "Rhett Calder," Vance said softly. "I was wondering when you'd show up. You've caused me considerable trouble." "You caused yourself trouble when you ordered my father killed." "Your father was a problem that needed solving. Garrett solved it. Business decision. Nothing personal." The casual dismissal of Jacob Calder's murder sent white-hot rage through Rhett's veins. His finger tightened on the trigger, every instinct screaming to end Vance right here, right now. Delilah's voice came from behind him, quiet and steady. "Don't. You shoot him. You become what he is. Let the law handle it." "The law failed my father." "Then don't let it fail you too." Vance laughed, a sound like breaking glass. How touching. The son wants revenge, but the woman wants justice. An old story, and it always ends the same way. Someone dies. "Yeah," Rhett said. "You." Garrett moved then, fast as a snake, bringing the rifle around. Rhett fired twice, both shots taking the big man in the chest. Garrett staggered backward, crashed into a bookshelf, and slid to the floor, the scar on his throat working soundlessly as he died. Drummond screamed and bolted for the door. Delilah tripped him easily, putting a knee in his back and a gun to his head. That left Vance standing alone behind his desk, the whiskey glass still in his hand, his expression unreadable. "Well, I suppose that's that." He raised the glass in a mock toast. "Your father would be proud. You got your revenge." "This isn't revenge, it's justice." "Tell yourself whatever helps you sleep." Vance drained the whiskey, set the glass down carefully. "But you killed Garrett. You pulled the trigger, and a piece of you died with him, whether you admit it or not." Before Rhett could respond, Vance's hand moved with shocking speed, pulling a derringer from his vest. But he didn't point it at Rhett. He pointed it at himself. "I said I wouldn't give them the satisfaction," Vance said calmly. The shot was small and sharp, and Salazar Vance crumpled behind his desk without another word, choosing his own ending rather than facing justice. The silence that followed was absolute. Rhett stood there, gun still raised, staring at the body, feeling nothing. Empty. Like something had been carved out of him and the hole couldn't be filled. Delilah moved to his side, gently lowered his weapons. "It's over." "Is it?" Outside, the shooting had stopped. Marshal Donnelly's voice rang out, calling for surrender, promising fair treatment. One by one, Vance's men threw down their weapons and emerged with their hands raised. The war was over. The Empire had fallen, and Rhett Calder stood in the ruins, wondering what victory was supposed to feel like. The days that followed blurred together. Trials, depositions, testimonies. Judge Moss presided over it all with stern efficiency, using Vance's ledgers to dismantle the criminal network piece by piece. Sheriff Drummond was arrested, tried, and sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison. The surviving members of Vance's organization either fled or faced justice. The Wells Fargo gold was returned to its rightful owners, minus a finder's fee that Delilah negotiated with ruthless efficiency. Through it all, Rhett felt like a ghost watching his own life from a distance. People called him a hero. The territorial governor personally thanked him. Newspapers ran stories about the young gunslinger who'd brought down the most powerful crime boss in the territory. But Jacob Calder was still dead, and no amount of justice could bring him back. 2 weeks after Vance's death, Rhett stood at his father's grave, hat in hand, staring at the simple headstone. He'd had new words carved, killed for speaking truth. So everyone who passed would know Jacob Calder hadn't died for nothing. "I got them, Dad," he said quietly. "Vance, Garrett, all of them. The ledgers are with the judge. Your name's been cleared. Everyone knows what you tried to do." The grave offered no response, just stone and silence. Footsteps crunched on gravel behind him. Delilah approached, her hands in her pockets, her expression gentle. "You heading out?" she asked. "Tomorrow, going to Denver to see Clara. Make sure she's all right. And after that? Don't know yet. Haven't thought that far ahead." Rhett managed a tired smile. "You?" "Got my 20%, thinking maybe San Francisco. Start fresh somewhere nobody knows my name." She paused. "You could come with. City's big enough for 2 people trying to forget." It was tempting. Leave this place with its ghosts and memories. Start over where the past couldn't find him. But something held him back. "I don't want to forget," he said slowly. "I want to remember. Want to make sure what happened here matters." "Then what will you do?" Rhett looked at his father's grave, at the town spreading below, at the desert stretching away toward distant horizons. Dad believed in law, in justice, in doing things right even when it was hard. "Maybe I'll try to finish what he started. Work with Judge Moss, help clean up the territory, make sure other people don't have to go through what we did." Delilah smiled. "Your father would like that." "Yeah, I think he would." They stood together in comfortable silence, 2 survivors of a war that had cost them both more than they'd bargained for. Finally, Delilah turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, Rhett, you did good. Better than good. You could have become Vance, but you didn't. That takes strength. Or stubbornness. Sometimes they're the same thing." She touched his shoulder briefly. "Take care of yourself. And if you ever make it to San Francisco, look me up. First whiskey's on me. I'll hold you to that." She walked away, and Rhett was alone again with his father's memory and the weight of everything that had happened. The sun was sinking toward the horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson, and somewhere in town a church bell was ringing. He stood there until dark fell, then placed his hand on the headstone one last time. "I'll make it mean something, Dad. I promise." The stone was cold under his palm, but somewhere in his chest, something warm flickered. Not quite peace, not quite healing, but maybe the beginning of both. Rhett Calder walked away from the grave and toward whatever future waited, carrying his father's legacy and his own scars, determined to build something good from all the blood and ash. Behind him, the desert wind whispered across stone and sage, erasing footprints, bearing secrets, and making way for whatever came next. The war was over. The dead were buried. And in a land where justice had seemed impossible, one man had proven that sometimes stubbornness and sacrifice could change the world. It was enough. It had to be. And as Rhett rode out of town the next morning, heading north toward Denver and his sister and whatever healing time might bring, he carried with him three things: his father's pocket watch, the knowledge that he'd honored Jacob Calder's memory, and the understanding that some debts can only be paid forward, not back. The sun rose over the desert, bright and clean, promising another day in a land that kept moving forward, whether you were ready or not. And Rhett Calder, gunslinger and orphan and reluctant hero, moved forward with it, toward a future his father would never see but had died making possible. The road stretched ahead, long and uncertain, but for the first time since that terrible morning when he'd found his father dead, Rhett felt something close to hope. It would have to be enough. It was all any of them had.